Thank you so much for joining. How are you doing? How's everything going?
It's good. How's your day going?
It's good. It's 12 p.m. over here. I'm on the East Coast, so kind of just starting out. Pretty good. Yeah.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, it's I'm on
Oh,
West Coast. I'm in LA, so it's
oh,
it's nice and early in the morning for me, but I like the morning, so
it's like 9 a.m., right?
yeah.
Right, right. Okay, that's great. So, what's LA like? What's it like living out there?
Um, it's nice. We got great weather. And it's something that I love and appreciate because I've been to other parts of the world where like I was in London once and it was nice and it was sunny, it was like 90 something degrees,
Yeah,
and then it became a blistering rainstorm and I was like walking across the campus as it
right.
happened. I was like, this weather sucks.
London for you. It's like always rainy there, always like super cloudy. So I can totally relate to that. I went last year, experienced the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I think I like American weather a lot more over there than from the UK. But yeah, well, I'm glad life is going well. And let's just jump right into this podcast, just talking about film, shows, all of that. So I kind of want to know more about your journey as a content creator. Like, when did that start? How did that change till now, if you want to go into that?
Yeah, so I've been wanting to do this kind of stuff for a while, and I tried to do it with like Instagram posting and stuff, be like, hey, this is my review of this, and I post like a picture or something, and no one, I'd get like 5 likes,
I get it.
and then yeah, so I was before all this, before COVID, pretty much that was the big turning point for I think a lot of people to start doing content creation.
Yeah.
I was working as an IT supervisor for this multi-million dollar
Wow.
company, and then I wanted to work at Disney. That was my big dream. It's always been my dream ever since I was young. I wanted to work at Disney,
Hmm.
and I applied, and I'm not exaggerating here, over 400 different jobs at Disney,
Wow.
and I
Okay.
got one job interview that whole time. So I have a bachelor's degree. I've been working since I was 17. I was like 25 at the time.
Hmm.
Like I said, I was an IT supervisor making a lot of money, and I was like, this is a downgrade for me to work at Disney. But I really wanted to work there.
Yeah,
And
it
they're
makes sense.
like, yeah, so I finally got a job interview. It was for housekeeping at the hotel. And they're like, oh, you're not really qualified. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm like an IT supervisor. Like I have like I deal with celebrities on a daily basis. Like I know what I'm doing. I have a team of people that I run underneath,
Hmm.
and she's like, the only job we can really get you for is custodial. So if you're okay with that, and I was like, that's literally less than half of what I get paid an hour. Like, but
Yeah.
I'll do it. I'll do it because Disney has their own career center, like online. So like you have like you go to like if you right now if you go to like disneycareers.com whatever, they have their own private career site just for employees.
Yeah.
So employees get their first dibs on careers, and then it gets sent to the public. So I was
Hmm.
like, I got to get
Yeah.
any job, and then I get into that.
Hmm.
So I was like, screw it. So on Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights, I'd work my 8 hour shifts, and then I'd go back to my job Monday through Friday, working 10 hours a day. And I
Wow.
did that for about 2 weeks,
Hmm.
and then I got a job interview for Marvel Studios. They wanted me to be the assistant to the director of security,
That's amazing.
and yeah, I got the job and everything, and then COVID happened, and they killed the job.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, they didn't even tell me why or
Hmm.
anything. They just said, "Hey, the studio's closing right now. We'll get back to you when it's all
Hmm.
done." Never got back to me. Never sent me anything. Never.
Um,
I I reached out to them. I even reached out to HR and I was like, "Hey, can you get a hold?" And they're like,
hmm.
Each studio has their own specific like recruiting person, and that person only has to answer to their studio. So like we can't get a hold of her if she doesn't reply back to us. There's nothing we can do.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So
That's really sad.
yeah, it was so.
Hmm.
So eventually, I got hired at Disney Entertainment. So I worked in accounting for Disney
Okay.
at Walt Disney Pictures, and so I got to like work with like the transition of Fox over to Disney, and I got to meet like the Simpsons
Hmm.
writers and like do all basic stuff. And then eventually, like, hey, thanks for all your hard work, but now that we're done moving everything over from Fox to Disney, you're
Hmm.
fired. We don't need you.
That,
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah,
Like, they should
yeah.
not be that. At least transition you into another role, not outright.
That's what I asked them to do.
Yeah.
I was like, if you can even transition me back into Disneyland, I'll take it. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. But like, you can apply.
Yeah.
And so, so I did. I applied to Disneyland. And I
Hmm.
applied to just a random assortment of jobs. And they're like, hey, we're so understaffed. We need a lifeguard, a horse caretaker, or well, there was a third one. They're like whichever one you want is yours. Like we were so understaffed.
Yeah.
Whatever one you want, you get the job. So I was like, lifeguarding, sure.
Okay.
So I became a lifeguard at the Disneyland hotels because I was getting a master's degree. Disney paid for you to get your bachelor's or master's, whatever.
Okay.
When I was at Disney, I was getting was at Disney Pictures, I was getting my master's. When they got rid of me, I hadn't finished my master's.
Oh,
So I
right.
wanted to get back at the job, do that, and also they paid for childcare, which I had a child at the time, so I was like, cool,
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so during all that time, I was doing content. So I really like, I
Mhm.
love Disney. I love Disney so much. I named my son Peter after Peter Pan and Peter Parker.
Oh,
My second son is named Miles after Miles Morales. Like, I
right.
love Disney. It's a huge part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Love it, and that's how I started off as a content creator.
Okay.
Was doing Disney stuff. I was exclusively Disney stuff.
Okay.
And I started getting a few followers in like a month or so. I got like 10,000
Really
followers, and it was
great.
really cool. And then I started doing more like folktale stuff because I like that kind of stuff too.
Yeah.
And then when I had like 20,000 followers, I applied to Disney because back then at the time Disney has like, hey, if you're a content creator, we'll sign a special agreement where
Mm-hmm.
you agree to work with Disney and we give you free stuff and we'll send you places and yada yada yada, and we put you on a list. And if we like working with you, great.
Okay.
And then I applied to that list and they said, hey, you don't fit our criteria. And I
Oh.
was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I exclusively do like Disney content. And I'm like, now I'm loud and I'm more,
Mm-hmm.
but back then I wasn't. I was very much like, I want to do Disney. So no cussing, no saying bad things. And
Oh,
Disney, they didn't care. They still didn't want me. So I was like, okay, if Disney doesn't want me, that kind of like puts a damper in
I
everything.
get
And then, yeah, so it just, so at the time, so what I did was
it.
during my time, I used that to become a substitute teacher.
Okay.
So I work full time as a substitute teacher. So while I'm doing that,
Mm.
I do my content creation.
Content creation. Wow.
Yeah,
That
and it works out.
it works out. Okay.
Yeah,
That is quite the
yeah,
journey, but I hope you can have me sometime soon because I can tell you have, a lot of passion for Disney. I also love a lot of their
yeah.
movies, shows. It's really great company, so I wish you all the best for that you
Thank you,
can
thank you.
um
Yeah,
yeah.
I love Disney. They're a
Mhm.
good company. They're not perfect, and I call them out on that. And like, hey, because
Yeah.
I think this is how I view anything. If you love something or someone,
Mhm.
you have to point out their inconsistencies, the times that they do wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's to me, it's just like if you don't point out like, hey, you guys are good, but you could be better.
Right.
This is how I think that could be done.
Mhm.
A company should be willing to accept like, oh, hey, and
Mhm.
I've noticed Disney has been very bad about that. Like I applied for their DEI job
Mhm.
to be a coordinator for DEI. Specifically, I would have been one of the people in charge of Disneyland's diversity, equity, inclusion program.
Oh, nice.
And the recruiter loved me, the supervisor loved me, the manager loved me. And then I talked to the director,
Oh,
and she was like, so what are you going to do if you become so? I was like, well, I have this plan, this plan. I want to do this, this, and this, and this.
yeah.
And she's like, yeah, we really don't need that from you, though. Like, we just need you to schedule what we tell you to schedule. Like, it's just a scheduling job, really. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh,
Mhm.
well, I was going to be in charge of Disneyland. She's like, well, yeah, but like what we tell you to do, we don't need you to like
Have
do new stuff.
yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's just like because Disneyland's like their DEI is kind of bad. Like you guys have like these DEI meetings, but they're like 2 hours away from Disneyland.
Mhm.
How can any Disneyland employee go to these meetings about DEI when you don't have them within
Mhm.
an hour drive at Disneyland? I was like, we should have them at Disneyland or whatever. And she's like, yeah, that's not really, it's just not really in our plans to do
That's
that. And I was like, ah,
yeah. You know, there's always room for improvement.
yeah,
They're gonna, you know, because they do need more DEI. Like with their films, I think they're trying a little bit with that, but we could always have more diversity.
exactly. And it can be natural. I always tell people it
Yeah.
can absolutely be natural. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's not. I get it. Sometimes you're just like, oh, okay. But like
Yeah.
to me, it's like we can get some really amazing
Mhm.
stuff when we just have this natural diversity to things. Like one of my favorite shows is Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur.
Right.
And the two main characters, Black Girl and Latina Girl.
Mhm.
And they have such good chemistry. They focus on both. It's a very much part of the culture. Like,
Mhm.
and I auditioned to write for that show.
Mhm.
And it's a great show. It sucks I didn't get on it, but at the same time, like I got nothing but respect for Disney Junior. I've interviewed multiple times for multiple
Mhm.
shows, and they have such love and respect for diversity and include like DEI. It's phenomenal. The rest of Disney, not so much, but Disney Junior, man, they're teaching kids a lot of good stuff, and
Yeah,
so I'm happy about that.
right. But I think with the main like Disney Entertainment, we're seeing a bit of a shift. Like with
Yeah,
Encanto, with Soul, we're seeing more of that, at least in recent years.
yeah.
So, your thoughts
It's
on
still
the
not perfect.
okay.
It's still not perfect. I got in trouble about for what I was saying about Encanto, because like
Oh,
I don't. So like Encanto was written by two white guys,
oh,
and yeah,
actually, hmm,
yeah, and it was directed by two white guys.
that,
And then in the last year
mm-hmm,
of filming it, they brought in a Latina woman to come in and work on the script. But it's been working for 5 years,
mm-hmm,
and they have one less than 1 year left. And they're like, no, see, like we have a Latina working on this. I'm like, you guys worked on it for 5 years with two
mm-hmm,
white guys writing and directing, and then the last year,
mm-hmm,
yeah. And it's a little different because Soul did something similar.
mm-hmm,
Soul was written and directed by a white guy, and then they brought in a black guy to come in. But they listen. He was like, "Hey, we got to fix some things up. Like he's got to go to a barber shop. He's got to do these things."
yeah,
Yeah, and they listen. They're like, "Yeah, absolutely."
okay.
And Kanto was not that case. This is something else. And I'm like, it's cool. I get it. But like they reference Hercules in the movie, and to me,
Oh,
I get like, oh, we know who Hercules is, but
mm-hmm,
how many times do we watch like a white main character movie of Disney where they reference a black hero or an Asian hero? Like nobody's referencing that kind of stuff. So it's weird that like we're in a closed off city in Latin America
mm-hmm.
and they're referencing Hercules.
Yeah,
It's
they
we got
should.
our own heroes. We got to
What are some of your favorite Latinx heroes?
So to me, I really love the Aztec stuff. I really love those heroes. So like Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl, the Smoking Mountain and the White Lady. It's a
Mm-hmm.
very beautiful story. It's pretty much like Romeo and Juliet, but with an Aztec princess and a warrior.
Yeah,
Um, Even in South America, they got Sassy. He's this one-legged black guy. He's like Afro-Latino black guy
okay,
with one leg. He wears a red hat and he's a genie and he can summon sandstorms.
interesting.
And he's nice and he's funny. And if you get his hat,
Mm-hmm.
which smells really bad, if you grab his hat and it smells, it'll leave a stain in your
Yeah.
hand. But you get a wish. But
Mm-hmm.
if you miss the hat, he can kill you.
Oh,
So it's this really unique dynamic of like he's a kid too. His office presents like a little kid. It's like a one-legged kid with a little hat, and it's like Brazil's big thing, and that's like their big hero, and nobody ever talks about it outside of Brazil. So
oh,
there's that kind of stuff, and we have a lot of like there's a lot of three different things. Like I always say like there's mixed, there's mestizos, Latinos,
mm-hmm.
there is indigenous, and then there's the African side.
Right.
Because Latin America is all three. We have influences like Mami Wata.
Yeah.
It's this big goddess. So she's a mermaid. She's from African mythology. She's based on Oshun.
Do you know what part of Africa?
Uh,
Would it be
she's
West?
Yoruba. She's West Africa Yoruba.
Where I'm from, the West African region. Okay.
So the Yoruba, the Orishas, she's one of those, and when they came over here against
Mm,
their will, but when they came over here, they kept some of the religious figures. So Mami Wata is one of the big ones,
okay.
and she became bigger, and so now she's bigger here than she is in Africa,
Interesting.
which or in Latin America.
Yeah.
About Sasi, yeah, Sasi's really cool.
Right.
And yeah, so and the thing is too is like the way folklore works is it's expansive. So we
Mm,
have this thing called the Bagman or El Cucuy, and he's this like goat figure that carries around children in a bag. He stuffs kids in a bag,
oh,
and I'm like, that's Krampus. That's literally
yeah.
Krampus. And
Yeah.
you look at like the timeline of when those stories started appearing. There's no indigenous stories about a goat figure because we didn't have goats. So
Mm-hmm.
this goat figure appeared after Europeans arrived. I'm like, it's Krampus. They brought with them the stories of Krampus, and Latinos loved it. And they went, Christmas time? No, every time of the year.
Right.
So there's little things like the Filipino manananggal. It's like one of the biggest Filipino monsters. It's a vampire bat woman that splits in half.
Mm-hmm.
And so her legs stay where she is, and the top half flies around with bat wings.
Oh,
That's based off a Maya monster, a monster from Maya mythology.
okay.
But we don't know that as much. Now we know where's the Filipino monster. So to me, there's a lot of creatures and monsters and stories that we
Mm-hmm.
have that are either, influenced or whatever, forest spirits in Brazil. Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of forest spirits. There's religious stories too. A lot of religious stories in Latin America. Um, and to me, it's like, and some are a little dated and sexist, and some are very inspirational, and some are bad. And a lot of it's like warning. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Like one of them is the priest who saw too much, and
Mm,
there's a priest who's like, "Hey, God, can I take a look at you?" And God's like, "Nah, like
mm,
there's some consequences for that if you take a look if you see me." And the priest's like, "No, dude, I just want just one blink. I'm just gonna open my eyes for 1 second, just one eye for just one quick blink." And
right.
God's like, okay, like, sure, look upon me.
Hmm.
So he does. He does a quick wink. And in that time, 40 years pass.
Oh, huh.
So he doesn't die or go crazy. He's like, oh, I saw God. Like, that was beautiful. He walks up to tell everyone, and they're like, oh, why are you coming out of that decrepit abandoned church? And he's like, what do you mean? He's like,
It's
yeah, dude,
been
uh, it's been 40 years. And that's how
40.
the story ends.
Okay.
And I'm like, it's not God is bad or anything. Like, God warned him.
Yeah.
There's consequences for looking upon
Mhm.
me. The preacher was like, I'm okay with it. And those are the
Okay.
consequences, you know?
Yeah.
So
I
there's some cool stories and everything, both religious,
right.
Aztec, Catholics, everything. So like, there's
Or
stories they can do. Um, I just, and I think we'll get to that point eventually.
we'll get.
Like we're seeing more and more. Like there's that African studio that called out Disney Animation, and
Oh,
they're like, yeah, Disney doesn't make African stuff. And then Disney's like,
they
oh,
recently did it. It was one series, Awaju.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Have you seen it?
I have. I thought I loved it because to me, I'm like, that's what I want. Like, because they did not say nice things about Disney. They were pretty mean about how like
Yeah.
where they were like Disney doesn't do African stuff. They don't hire black people. They don't hire African people. We have our stories, and every time we do,
Mhm.
it feels like you guys just ignore us. Because like to their point, it's like, what African stories do we have from Disney? The Lion
And
King
Black Panther.
and Black Panther,
Yeah.
and that's really it, you know. And it's like in Lion King, they're animals.
It. They're pretty much animals, like
Yeah.
the whole thing. We just have Black Panther and then now Awaju. Very
Mm-hmm.
limited voices.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then I also argue too. I'm
Mhm.
like, Princess and the Frog. He's not a black prince. She's a black princess.
That's what. Yeah, I know you were interacting with that. He's not a Black prince.
No,
Um, South Asian. It's not really confirmed, but he's not. So there's.
he's not anything.
Yeah.
That's what Disney was asked that.
Mhm.
Yeah, Disney asked them that, and they're like, hey, what race is Prince Naveen? And they're like, their answer was, and I quote, whatever you want him to be.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's the most racist response. He's brown. I don't know. Pick a brown country, whatever. It doesn't matter.
They could have used that chance to clarify, oh, where did Prince Sabine come from? I know it's Macedonia, but where
Yeah,
specifically? So it
and
really could have. Hmm.
yeah, and it's funny because
Yeah.
this is what I always tell people, like, because you can tell because Disneyland's casting is very specific. They cast people to the inch when it comes to height requirements, to the weight. Like you have to be perfect for this stuff. And when it comes to Prince Naveen, they've casted
Oh,
Filipinos, they've casted black guys, they've casted Latinos,
interesting.
they've casted dark skinned white guys. Like if you're brown,
Mm-hmm.
like
Even tan.
yeah, if you're tan and have slightly straight hair, you can be Prince Naveen. So I'm
Wow.
like, if that's their standard,
Mm-hmm.
and Princess Tiana is a black woman,
She is. Yeah.
clearly and that's the actress. You have to be black for Princess Tiana, you know. So
Right.
to me, I'm like, it's not gonna. It's if he was black, we'd know he's black. You know, like I say, it was like if there's heroes like Marvel Studios, I've always talked about. Like if there was a Latino superhero,
Mhm.
we'd know. They'd tell us. They'd be very loud about it
They
because they're loud about everything.
right.
They're not. They haven't said anything, so they don't exist.
Right. That's true. So I can only hope that they clarify Prince Sabine soon. Maybe he gets his own movie. I don't
Or
know.
give us another movie. They're like that's the idea. I'm
We
like, we don't
more idea.
only have to have Princess and the Frog. We can have another black princess. It could be two. We got like
There could.
9 white princesses.
Yep. White, Belle, Cinderella, and there's so many different remakes of those movies. Cinderella, there's one, two, three, the live action, multiple remakes, so there can be another Black Princess.
Exactly. And we like I think the most ironic bit about this because like I deep dive into
Mhm.
folklore is that the original story of Princess and the Frog is
Mhm.
from Africa.
Wow,
Europeans stole the story, rewrote it,
that's
and
beautiful.
that's how we got Princess and the Frog.
Mhm.
But it's an African story, and we have that story and everything. And you're like, yeah, like the way
Mhm.
folklore is we break it down is that the more details are added, the more we know that that story wasn't original. So
Oh,
what you do is you would take like so say like oh China made the first Snow White, no Europe made the first Snow White or Princess Florida. So we take all those stories
yeah.
and we look at them and we go which has the less details, which
Mhm.
is the core original story that everything else looks like it's added upon, because
Mhm.
that's when you know it's not from that culture.
Okay.
And so we take that and we look at the most original simplified version of the story and it's from Africa.
Okay.
So it's like even and that was completely by accident. Disney had no idea that the original Prince of the Frog is from Africa. So it's like y'all could have told that story. Instead, you take this European and go, where do black people live in America?
You
New
are.
Orleans. And then they tell the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They could have definitely. had the original story, had black directors, black writers be a part of this movie, but they missed out on the opportunity. And I know a new series is coming out,
Hmm.
Tiana. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think it's going to be good?
I, like what bothers me. Hey, Flo Daddy. Speaking of Disney, we're just talking about Disney. Disney has amazing people working their animation team, and
Hmm.
there's so many wonderful people that work in Disney animation. But my thoughts for Princess and the Frog, the show, is that like, I hope it's really good. I have no like. That's the thing is when
Yeah.
people like, oh, like I say like, oh, I don't think Nosferatu is going to be a good movie. I'm not hoping it's a bad movie.
Hmm.
I hope it's great. I love being wrong, but there's certain things I'm like, I don't think this is either going to do good or ever. I'm hoping Princess Frog is good. I'm hoping I use actual 2D animation because they'll be like, we're using hand drawn animation, and it's like,
Are
are
you?
you?
Yeah.
Are you though? Like hand drawn in what capacity?
Yeah.
And the bigger problem for me is that they
Hmm.
stopped doing hand drawn animation because of Princess and the Frog.
Yeah.
The movie flopped for a variety of
It did
reasons. It,
flop.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it to me, there's so many reasons why it did bad, and I think that has to do with marketing. I think that has to do with how they presented the movie and everything. Um, and so they're like, 2D animation, man, we don't do that anymore. And I'm like,
Hmm.
there's a space, and we see nowadays with like Into the Spider Verse and everything. I'm like, people want hand drawn animation. People want these different
Yeah,
styles.
not always the same like
Mm-hmm.
Pixar animation style.
Yeah, and
Right.
like the thing is too, it's like I would argue like Pixar can keep doing what it's doing. Pixar doesn't need animation styles to do anything else. Let Pixar keep doing, but Disney animation, the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you can like I could say like, oh yeah, Encanto was Pixar, and people are like, yeah, okay. Or I could say like Turning Red was Disney, and they'd be like, yeah, okay. The fact that we and those aren't that's not true by the way. Turning Red not is Pixar, not Disney, and
Yeah.
exactly. But to me, I'm like the fact that it's so hard nowadays to tell the difference between Disney animation and Pixar animation.
That-
It's not a good sign.
It's
We,
not.
yeah, just like like and the thing is like DreamWorks and Illumination are owned by the same studio, but there's a
Oh,
difference between they're both owned by Universal.
yeah.
Um, and unfortunately for Disney, Illumination and DreamWorks are side by side doing better than Pixar and Disney Animation,
People are
and that's not a good thing.
right because
Yeah,
Disney's on top in terms animation. So,
exactly. And so for me,
uh,
I'm like Disney has to. I'm not saying like go do something new, like go do your own Spider Verse, because that's what I think. They're like, oh, we're gonna try these new like with Wish. They're like, we're gonna
but
try different art styles.
no,
And yeah, I was
it,
just
yeah. But Wish, I guess technically she was the second Black Disney princess. She was Afro Latina, so
and
they
that's the
did
thing too is like that's what I say about the movie. So like the actress herself is her father's Puerto Rican. She doesn't know what ethnic racial breakdown he is.
okay.
She herself has dark skin and her mom is white, so she's got to work with just that information
Oh,
that her dad is from Puerto Rico
mm,
and she's white and she was raised by her mother. And for
right,
most of her life, she and this is all in interviews, she didn't identify as Afro Latina. She said, "I'm biracial. It's what I am."
right.
And it wasn't until West Side Story came out that they wanted her, and she's like, "Hey, I'm not Afro Latino. I don't know anything about Spanish. Like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
be completely out of my element."
Mm-hmm.
And it was Lynn that was like, "Yeah, go for it."
Oh,
And she did that, and she's like, "Okay, now I'm Afro Latino." And I'm like, "That's if that's how your identity happens, whatever. Cool. It's up to you to choose that, right?" But
right.
they didn't bring that into Wish.
Into
Her father is white. Her mom is black. In
okay,
Wish. So
biracial. Mm-hmm.
exactly. So they could have gone with that Afro Latino, something that they could have had a Latino actor play her mother or her father. They could have gone with taking the actor's real life identity and
Mm-hmm.
bringing it to the movie, which is what we see a lot. But they didn't. Instead, they went, no, 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 no. Her dad is white, the
Mm,
mom is black, and that's it. And we're putting this in the Mediterranean. So there's no way she's Latina in any way. And so
right.
it's like you could have had this Afro Latina icon. She could have been this biracial. She's got
Yeah.
Latina, African, and white. She could have had this really unique
Yeah.
background, and they didn't. They outright refused. They're like, "Oh, that's too complicated for people. Just make her black and white." And
Yeah.
like, it's I just it feels like a letdown to me. I'm like, I think Afro Latinos deserved a little better than that to have this first time. Because when's the next time we're gonna get an Afro Latino princess? And
I,
even then, she's not a princess. She's
ooh.
she's a fairy godmother. So it's like we could have
Mm-hmm.
had her become a princess,
We could have.
and she chose not to.
Yeah. I Disney can do better,
Yeah.
and so much room for improvement. And yeah, just hoping for the best because I know that Sony Pictures with Miles Morales,
Mm-hmm.
we got a presentation showcasing his Latin side and speaking a little bit of Spanish as well.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, his black side. So I think they portrayed
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
I
That's
really,
what I say.
yeah. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I love Miles. Like I said, I named my son Miles Morales. My
Right.
son Miles
Mhm.
after Miles Morales. I love the character. I've always loved the character. His first original like 12 issue run, or at least the 12 issues that like after that got a little silly. But the first initial 12 issues run, it was beautiful. It was sad. It was wonderful,
Awesome.
and it's like, and I liked it too. And there's issues I have with it, and I've been public about this. Like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I like Miles Morales, but I think we should start trying to look for actors who are Latino and black, because that's what Miles is. His mother's Latina, his father's black. We need to find an actor that's both.
Okay.
And ironically, there is or I guess I would say it's fate. He's 19 years old now. His name is Miles Brown, and he has a Latino father and a black mother. And I've met him in person, and he's a sweet guy. And he's such a nice dude.
Uh huh.
And I'm like, this is for you. This is your role, dude.
That's
Like, and we haven't, the fact that Disney hasn't and Sony haven't jumped on him is crazy to me, because I'm like,
I don't know.
they, yeah. And so, like, for the movies, I'm like, we have a black actor who's not Latino voicing him, and that's fine. And when he speaks Spanish, it's not the best, but at the same time, at least he's speaking Spanish. At least the actress playing his mother is Latina. It's a part of his identity.
It
His last name being Morales doesn't make any sense, and I stand by that. It doesn't make any sense.
is.
It should be his
I,
father's name.
okay.
Yeah.
In the Latin community, it's not or how do last names
Yeah.
usually work?
Yeah. I would argue, especially in the Latin community, we have this very masculine dynamic of, like, in the very least, we'll hyphenate it.
Okay.
That's like because what you want to do is you want to pass on your legacies.
Mm-hmm.
And both last names are important. So that's why you hear jokes about people being like, "Oh, my name is Fernando Martinez, Guillermo Guerrero," but because it's
Yeah.
the last names. It's the last names legacy of, you have two parents who hyphenate their names, and if they have kids, they're like, "Well, I'm not getting rid of my names."
Yeah.
So both parents will hyphenate. So in the very least, he should have been Miles Morales hyphen whatever, And I get it, and they made an excuse in the book to be like, "Oh, like, this is why his last name's not that." And I'm like, it's a bad excuse.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just acknowledge it. It's a bad reasoning. I get it, but it's just dumb. But
Yeah.
as a character, I love him. I love the movies. I think that first Into the Spider-Verse was one of the greatest and most influential animated movies of all time. I think him as a character is wonderful. My only complaint about the sequel is that it wasn't enough him. It was like, oh, let's do a Gwen story. And I'm like, no, I don't I want Miles
More
movie.
Miles
Yeah.
Morales.
Yes. And so I'm like, that's why I didn't like the second one as much as the first one. I'm like, there's not enough Miles in this. I want Miles. I don't. It's
Yeah.
cool. There's other. I don't care. I want a Miles Morales
Mm-hmm.
movie. You want to do multiverse? Do it in a team of movies. I want my Miles. I want Miles to have his story to tell. I want him to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And so far,
Yeah.
we didn't get that in the second one. So I'm like, man, like,
No.
give me that. Give me that.
You have to see more of the other Spider-Man.
Yeah.
There's one by Gwen Stacy, then of
Mm-hmm.
course Miguel O'Hara.
Mm-hmm.
And do you like his characterization, or do you
So
think he's a complex character?
so here's what I'll say. Character assassination to the absolute epitome. If you've ever read Spider-Man 2099,
Mm-hmm.
that Miguel O'Hara is not the Miguel O'Hara we get in the movie. They're completely different characters.
Okay.
Completely different. There's no connection between the two of them. It's
Yeah.
like Miguel in the comics he's a jerk. Admittingly, he's not a nice guy. But he's not that. He's not like, we need to kill Miles. We need to kill a child to, like,
Down, kill him. Yeah.
yeah, I was like,
There's none.
too much.
It was too dark of a story.
Yeah, and it's just not Miguel. And also for Miguel to be the leader, I'm like, Miguel's not a leader. He doesn't even want to be in a team. You're trying to tell me he's going to lead the Spider-Man when in the comics he's not even like anywhere near, like, they're like, hey, join the team. He's like, I really don't want to, guys. You guys are nerds, and I don't want to do this. So it's like,
No, I get it. Just like they didn't get the comic book accuracy
yeah,
of Miguel. Okay.
yeah.
All right. And how would you want to see Beyond the Spider-Verse? Like, how can they really have a great finale to this trilogy?
So, like, this is what I tell people, because I've talked to people that say, that movie was never coming out this year. I don't know who had the idea. It was not.
No.
It was never, ever, ever going to come out this year. They like, someone spread the rumor. They're like, yeah, they're going to make the movies back to back, and then the second one's going to come out the next year. They took a 6-month hiatus. That's what I was told. Is that after they finished the first movie, they said, hey, we're all going to take a 6-month vacation because we're exhausted. And I'm like, that 6 month vacation jumps into the next movie. And I was like, when you say they took a 6 month vacation,
Mm-hmm.
that was after they finished filming both movies? Like, no. After they finished filming the second movie,
Mm-hmm.
have not started working on the third one, they took a 6 month vacation.
Right.
So I was like, yeah, we were never going to get the second or the third movie this soon. And we're
Nope.
probably not going to get it for another 3 years, if we're being
I
realistic.
feel like 20.
Because animation, yeah, 2027 is what I think. Just, it's animation. These things take time. You can't rush this stuff. Like, a single frame for them just to draw it and to process it in the movie takes
Mm-hmm.
like 3 months.
That's.
It's in the very least, and
Mm-hmm.
that's like 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So, as for like the movie itself, I think what they need to
Mm-hmm.
be better, at least for me, is make it more of a Miles story.
Okay.
It's I want Miles to go back. Like, I think the villain, I get it, the Spot. I could care less about this
Okay.
Spot villain,
Care
and
about it.
like yeah, it's too big too soon is what I would say. It's like if you did the Avengers Infinity War in Phase 1.
Oh,
It's too much too soon. Miles
yeah.
is still becoming. He just became a superhero a
Mm-hmm.
year or two before the second movie takes place.
Right.
He has no reason. And to me, I'm like, and it's my biggest complaint about that was that the Spider-Man look weak, and I get that, like, oh, like Miles was, he's crafted or whatever, but I'm like, regardless of who it is, a single Spider-Man was able to evade like 300 multiverse ready fighting Spider-Man. I don't care who it is.
Yeah.
That's insane. That's insane that in a place he's never been to, he's able to avoid like 500 Spider-Men. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, it doesn't make Miles look strong. It makes the rest of them look dumb. Like, that's like,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's why we have like Miguel's suit is like electronic, because they're like,
Mm-hmm.
realistically, Miguel could not lose to that Miles. They're like, well, let's make his suit electronic, so when Miles zaps him, it breaks his suit. And I'm like, okay, let's use something really convoluted to justify Miles escaping. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just want I want a Miles story. I want this to be a personal story for Miles. I don't care about Gwen Stacy, like in the fact that she's a co-main character.
Okay.
You want to tell Gwen Stacy's story? Get her a movie. You want to tell all this stuff? I want Miles. I want Miles to have this really beautiful personal
Mm-hmm.
story, and I feel like we're gonna get that if you combine the two movies together.
Oh,
But watching them separately, I don't know if it's gonna. I don't think it's gonna like transition, because like my son, who was 5 when he watched it, when it
mm-hmm.
ended, he stood up in the theater, was like, "Where's the rest of
Right.
it? Where's
It
where?"
was a clip.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I tell people, I'm like, they're like, "Oh yeah, cliffhangers." I get it, but here's the thing:
Yeah.
a complete movie can end with a cliffhanger. You can't have an incomplete movie with a cliffhanger. That's not the way things work.
Right.
Like, people are like, well, Star Wars. Star Wars had a beginning, middle, and end.
It did.
Through the Spider-Verse did not have an end. It
Mm-hmm. Well, anyway.
Events unfold,
Mm-hmm.
it ends. That's not a definitive end. They didn't beat Spot. He didn't settle with Miguel. The plots introduced in the Act 1 were not settled in Act 3. That's an
And
incomplete
then we
film.
get
So,
Miles Morales from
yeah,
Earth.
and then we get another Miles Morales, and I'm like, you're introducing more stuff when you haven't solved the first one. So, yeah, I was like, oh, it was so long and it had no end, and I'm like,
Okay.
you needed to solve the Miguel O'Hara or the Spot thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't do either, and so like I get it, but to me, I'm like, it was an incomplete movie, and they got a lot to pick up in that third
They
movie, because
can wrap it. It
yeah, and it's supposed to be the last movie. They're not even doing a fourth one.
they're not. No, it's gonna be like the three, and then possibly live action, which I'm hoping they do cast Miles
Yeah,
Brown because I know him from Blackish. I used to watch that show.
mm-hmm.
I think he's talented. I would love to see him in live action. I think they can really pull it together if Marvel can just cast him.
That's the thing, is, can Marvel
Yeah.
cast him? And it's
Yeah.
like, I hope they can, because I'm not to be mean to he's not a tall guy. He's pretty short.
How
He's
tall?
young, but he's like maybe 5'6", 5'7". I'm 5'8", and I'm taller than him.
Okay.
And so I'm like, if he's
Mm-hmm.
5'7", that's perfect, because Tom Holland is not a tall guy.
Nope.
And to me, there's this dynamic that Spider-Man has to, in every capacity, be the bigger person than Miles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like, to me, my bigger problem with Spider-Man and Miles is that Spider-Man, Miles, Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but Miles is Miles,
Yeah.
and we
I.
don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, because like, people were like, well, Sam Wilson was Captain America. Yeah, because Steve was dead.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one Captain America.
There is.
There's multiple Spider-Men. now, and you can't like, oh, so what do we get? Like, even Miguel is like, well, I'm Spider-Man 2099 because I'm from the year 2099.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have it, and like what makes me laugh is that in the kids TV show,
Mm-hmm.
Spidey and His Amazing Friends,
Mm-hmm.
they solved that issue
How do they do?
because at the beginning of the show, they so there's Gwen, Miles, and Peter. And Gwen's like, I'm Ghost Spider, and they're like, cool name. And then Miles and Peter at the same time are like, and I'm Spider-Man. And they look at each other like, oh, we're gonna have a problem here. We can't both do Spider-Man.
Right.
And so
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man's like, okay, so we're both Spider-Man,
Mm-hmm.
but for the sake of not getting confused in battle or anything, I'll be Spidey. And then
Oh, okay.
then Miles is like, well, I'll be Spin because I like jumping around and spinning, which is ridiculous. I get how Spider-Man to Spidey, but Miles to Spins, I was like,
Yeah.
you know,
Because
whatever. He's a kid. He's a 5-year-old kid. This is
yeah,
accurate. So that's
yeah.
what they in the comics. So my son doesn't refer to him as Miles. He
Mm-hmm.
calls him Spins. He's like, Spidey, go Spider Spins. That's
Okay.
what he calls Miles Morales. Spins, because in the TV show, it's what he is. Just like when we showed him Spider-Man 2, the movie,
Mm-hmm.
he was like, why is Dr. Octopus a boy? Dr. Octopus is supposed to be a girl. Because in the Spidey and Amazing Friends
Yeah.
show,
It
it's a
was.
girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, same with Electro. So he's like watching the Spider-Man, they're like, why is that a boy? This movie's not right. They're not supposed to be boys. They're supposed to be girls.
Mm-hmm. I get it. Like they change some things sometimes, but
Yeah. And that to him is that's his point of view of Spider-Man. So when he like sees other characters, he's like, they're wrong. Octopus is a woman. And in his offense, Into the Spider-Verse also has a female Doctor Octopus.
it does in the
So
first.
for him, yeah, exactly. So for him growing up, he doesn't fathom the idea that Doctor Octopus is a man. When I told him, I was like, oh, there's different worlds, he's like, that's weird. It should be a woman. And I'm like, there's people that think the opposite. And he's like, well, they're wrong. Doctor Octopus is a woman.
Scene, so that's what he does.
Exactly. And that's what I tell people too. Like when people are like, oh, I don't like that this character's gender swap. I'm like, but here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
A, these are for children. Let's
Mm-hmm.
be clear about this. Majority of what Disney does is for children,
It
and
is.
children don't care.
They
My
do.
son loves The Little Mermaid. It's like his biggest crush. And then he saw the live action Little Mermaid.
Aw.
He didn't once bring up that she's black. He was just like, he's like, oh, cool. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all it took for him to go, oh, she's different.
Yeah. It's the adults that make this into an issue, but
Yeah.
yeah,
And it shouldn't be.
it should not be. No. Disney's attempt to correct the wrongs of just all the lack of diversity. So people shouldn't be complaining about that.
No, they shouldn't. And to me, it's like, and it's a silly thing to complain about too, because I'm like, if you don't like it, vote with your wallet. Just don't see the movie.
Yeah, just don't
Movie made a bunch of money.
watch something.
So yeah, and like to me, it's like, and Disney was like doubling down. They're like, oh, you don't like a black Little Mermaid? Well, it'd be a shame if we made a whole TV show with an all black
Yes.
cast. And I point out too is that just like with Devil Dinosaur, there is one non-white person on that show, and it's her best friend who's a Latina.
Ooh,
So it's an all black cast with one Latina, and I'm
that's really
like, it works, man. We look at a lot of projects where there's a black person, a brown person, Latino and a black person together. We get Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, one
yeah.
of the best Marvel movies,
It was
and
really
it's like,
mhm.
yeah, it's to me, it's and I hope to see more of that, because like it's this cool idea. They're like, hey, you want to do this? They're like, oh, well, you can't have all black people. You gotta have someone, and they're like, I get you, Latino, because we're
Latino.
not putting white people. Yeah.
Epic combination.
Yes.
Right.
So to me, I love that, and like I keep telling people too. It's like, to you, sure, I get it. It's ruining your childhood, but they're building childhoods. And to this,
They
kids don't care about this
they
stuff.
don't.
And we saw what much weirder stuff too. When I was a kid, Street Sharks came out, which is about a bunch of
Oh.
sharks. It's like Teenage Mutant Ninja
Mm-hmm.
Turtles, but with sharks,
Okay.
and they swim in the ground. So like they just like nosedive into the actual like asphalt, and they just swim like
Wow,
sharks.
I've never heard of that, but
it,
okay.
it was it was a great show, but it was like, I didn't care about it. Like, it isn't, it's just straight. Who cares? It's Street Sharks.
Right.
We had Martians, the mice Martians from outer space or something. It's like a bunch of like Martians turn out to look like humanoid rat people, and they like come to Earth and they save the day. And it's like, we've had so much weird shows about so much weird stuff,
Yeah.
and like
So weird.
I grew up with like in an all predominantly white community, and
Okay.
so when there was a brown character or a character who just wasn't white, that was me. That's what all my friends were like, oh, Matt, you're that character. And at the time, I'm like, yeah, okay, I don't get it. Like,
Yeah,
whatever. Like, we were
yeah,
playing superheroes, and the Iron Man TV show was out. And there's one not white character in that entire series, and it's War Machine. And that's how War Machine became one of my favorite characters, because they're like, well, Matt, you can play War Machine. I was like, sure, okay. And then I just started like looking back, and I didn't realize that at the time. I was looking, I was like, oh, I get it. I get that. They were
and
like, you're the closest to Black Widow.
yeah, because it was really
Hey,
for a while
yeah,
for Marvel.
it was. Yeah, and and then you have like coding and stuff too, like the whole idea of like Goofy from Mickey and Friends is black coded, Donald and Daisy are like Latino coded, like it's all this stuff where they're like, well, no, they're ducks, not race. I'm like, no, but like there's little things.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
mannerisms,
Yeah,
characterization.
yeah, and it's like to say like, and people are like, well, that's racist for Goofy. I'm like, no, like this is a thing though. Black people chose Goofy. It was not like Disney was like, we're trying to appeal to a black audience. Let's use
So
Goofy.
it's like we
That's
should
not what happened.
claimed
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Because Goofy, like, and I know there's that pretend meme, that like parody that went around. They're like, yeah, we made the blackest movie with Goofy, and it was all fake. But still, like, you look at that movie, and you're like, the references, the father-son connection, and I'm like, it's hard to get a good father-son connection, period. Let
Right.
alone a black father with a black son. We don't see that in films. They don't. They, yeah. And so for us to get the Goofy movie where Goofy is not a bad dad, he's a great dad. He's overly loving, and for the black community to be like, he's ours. I'm like, that says so much about what the black community wants. They want a good father, a loving father to represent it for their kids, for their families. And
For
I'm like, that's
sure.
what we want, Hollywood.
Yeah, we
So I'm
want
like, these kind of characters, they do it. And one
to
of my favorites is like Daisy Duck. Like I'm like, no, Daisy and Donald are like Latino coded. Like Donald Duck's got a hot temper. He's also was in Three Caballeros. Donald Duck is a part of the Three Caballeros. So
oh,
even if he's like white, he's still like, I'm down with the Latinos. Like we riding for that.
yeah.
And to me, it's funny because like in the one of the Roadster Racer shows or something, Daisy's cousin like joins the thing for a little. She has like appears in an episode.
Okay.
She has dark brown, like light, like tan brown feathers, whereas the Latina greaser bandana and the voice actress is a Latina. So I'm
Oh,
like, even like they couldn't get that with Daisy, but they're like, but her
cousins.
cousin
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that
So
chola, yeah. So to
okay.
me, I'm like, that's what I love about like coding and everything. I'm like, even characters that aren't that, we still will be like, no, like they're this. Like you
If-
can't tell me you're watching Lion King and Zazu is anything but white. Like he's like voice actor that because you could be like, oh well, Simba's still a black guy. Even a white guy voice him, Simba's still a black guy. Mufasa's a
all
black guy. Like, but Zazu's white.
that was definitely not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think in the live action that's coming out and in the original one, all
Mm-hmm.
the voice actors for the CGI and everything, they're all
Yeah,
well,
all the lions are black because they're like, hey, like this just makes more sense if the actor. And so I'm like, and I like that idea, but once again, like they're animals. We need to have a black princess and a black
like
prince who
this
aren't animals.
right. Because I feel like Disney and some studios have a history of turning characters into animals, even throughout the movie, even if it
Yep,
doesn't start off that way. Princess and the Frog, Spy in Disguise. I don't know if you've seen that one with Will Smith.
yep. Turning red, soul.
Right.
Yeah,
The list.
it's mm-hmm. And it happens in like to me I'd argue like they're like, oh well Luca. I'm like, yeah, but like white people don't really view Italians as white people. There's a little bit of a history and everything there with
Yeah.
like it's like they're like, oh Italians, they're spicy white. They're not white. It was spicy white.
Yeah. It's,
Uh yeah, so
mhm,
it's we are in this era where like we can have these things and I think it could be perfectly natural and normal. Where I think it's time that we have we still don't have a Latina Disney princess.
right.
And people are like, oh, Elena Avalor, she's not part of it. She was a TV show, and I can tell you, because I spoke to I'm going to be careful how I say this. I spoke to certain people
Oh,
who have worked on Elena Avalor, and they were like, we went to Disney Animation, and we said, can we do an Elena Avalor movie? And they told us no.
really? What was their reasoning?
Uh, Disney Animation wanted full control over the movie. They said, if
Oh,
you bring us Elena, we're going to make Elena. And the showrunner was like, it's my character.
and
I made Elena. I deserve to write the movie. And they couldn't come to terms with that.
never.
So,
Okay, I
yes.
understand. Mm-hmm.
So that's what we never got Elena Avalor because
Mm-hmm.
so as it stands now, she's not technically a Disney princess. She's a Disney princess when it's convenient for Disney, when they're like, oh,
right.
we need those Latinos to come buy our stuff. She'll be a Disney princess then.
But not
But usually,
like an official that.
yeah, but usually when you see her merchandise and everything, she's not with the Disney princesses. She's in the Disney Junior section.
Her own section. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a little frustrated because I'm like, we have this day and age of like I get it, you know, like I get this like Elsa and everything, but to me, it's like we can have more diverse stories and characters
Mm-hmm.
without turning white characters any other race. You
Yeah.
know, because it's clear. Like I don't care, and I know, and I think I care sometimes. Depends on how you do it. But I think for the most part, a lot of people are like, "Hey, don't do that anymore." And I understand that idea. I understand them going like, "Hey, this means a lot to me, and I have this idea in my head, and you're changing that idea, and you're telling me if I don't like that, I'm bad." And I get that argument. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I get it. So in that remark, I tell people, so then Disney, if you know those people exist,
Mm-hmm.
why piss them off? Have these movies so that when these movies, when you tell, they're like, oh, well, they're not based on properties. Well, so what?
Yeah.
It's okay. I mean, you have to start somewhere. And I always say this to people that when it comes to Disney is, how many times are we going to reboot something before you run out of stuff to reboot?
So many.
There is a well, Disney.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there
there's a
is.
well. You have X amount of movies. Once you've rebooted all of those,
Mm-hmm.
where are you going to do?
New stories. I guess that's where they're
You
gonna.
got, yeah, you have to tell new stories, and they have to be good stories. Like that's a big thing. I'm like, oh well, like I don't know why the movie did bad. And I'm like, well, you had the guy who wrote that really crappy movie, and then he made another crappy movie, and you
That
hired him.
it's a
Yeah,
repeated cycle. You're not setting yourself up for success.
yeah, and it's crappy too because like we see people like Ryan Coogler. Ryan Coogler is one of the most successful producers,
Mm-hmm.
and he's 38 years old.
Black Panther.
He's not even 40 yet.
Yep,
He made the Creed series.
he did.
Creed 1, 2, 3, one of the most popular sports, and I think they're the highest grossing sports franchise in
I
history,
love those.
excluding the Rocky ones.
Right.
And they're well received. And Michael B. Jordan directed the third one, his
Yeah. It's
debut, which was
very talented.
an anime nerd's dream.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he did the Black Panther
He did.
series. And I'm like, he's doing so much with so little and having such a. He's not like. He started with Fruitvale Station, which is a beautiful, sad movie. And
And
he went from there.
I know it has
You know,
Michael B. Mhm.
And to me, I'm like, and also as a Latino, it's like I can tell you is that, and I know he's seen my videos because I've heard of it, but like
Oh,
he's fighting for Latino rights. Because even if you look at those movies, it goes black-led movies with black
mhm.
talent, cool. But who's second in those? In every single Creed movie, there's the Latino boxer that's always there. In fact, he starts the third movie with the Latino world champion.
Exactly. I. That's really great.
And, yeah, he does it with Wakanda
He
Forever.
does
The Atlanteans were not
more.
Latinos. They were blue people in the comics. They were based off Greek stuff. And he said, no, I'm going to change that
Mhm.
so there's Latinos. Because I was told that he literally went to Kevin Feige and was like, hey, Latinos need something. And I'm going to give it to them. Because
Exactly.
we don't have anything for Latinos, so I'm going to do
Yeah.
it. And for him to do that, it's like he didn't need to do that. He needed to open the door for Latinos, but he was like, I'm going to be there. This is important to me. I know what it feels like to be left out. And so therefore, I'm going to make sure Latinos don't feel that way. And
Mhm.
so I know personally, we love his stuff. Like we Latinos are just like he's part of the family. We love him because he puts that fight for us, you know. And he doesn't need to,
Yeah,
but he does.
he does.
So it's stuff like him that he's like I said, he's not even 40 years old, and he's made the Creed franchise, Wakanda, like dude has so much of a long future to go, and he's such a nice, chill dude. And even then, the
Mhm.
the dude got arrested at a bank.
He.
Like so, yeah. So he got arrested at a bank because the bank teller was scared because he walked. He was in it was COVID era, so he had sunglasses, mask, and he walked into a bank and wrote down on a piece of paper like, "Hey, I need to withdraw this money from my account."
What?
Because he didn't want to say, "Hey,
Mhm.
I pay my personal like massage, whatever, like chiropractor." He's like, "I pay her in cash. I pay her $10,000."
Mhm.
And he's like, I don't want to announce, hey, I'm here to withdraw $10,000 in
Yeah.
cash. So he writes a note, which is what you
Mhm.
do. She freaked out and was like, panic button, pan button. So the cops came and arrested him.
That's
And they're like, well, she thought you were going to robbing the bank. And he's like, really? You thought I
great.
was robbing the bank?
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So he didn't end up going to jail. Like they took him to the car. The whole thing got explained, everything. But he's like, this is a really crappy experience. Like,
He doesn't.
and this was after Black Panther and everything. So
Mhm.
like, this is a multi-million-dollar director, writer, producer, and even then, he still gets problems with people freaking out over, over basic stuff. That is what you're supposed to do at a bank. If you
Right.
want to withdraw that much money, you write it down.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's stuff like that that I'm like, I love him, I appreciate him. I've heard nothing but wonderful things about him. I've heard how much he loves the Latino community too. So I'm like, we're gonna get there. I think this idea that like, oh, they're gonna we are getting there. We will eventually get to the point where Disney will make more Disney princesses. I think the person in charge of Disney animation is the problem right now
Ooh.
because she's open and stated she doesn't like princesses, she doesn't like romance, she doesn't like villains. And I'm like, then you're in the wrong
Are you
studio. Get out. You're in the
Snow White movie? The upcoming Snow
well. That's different. That one's and even then, that's the same thing. There's no prince in that one. They removed Prince Charming,
Ooh,
and I was
right.
like,
She's not
yeah, that
gonna be friends. It's gonna just be like her story. And
yes. Which I would argue is like, because like, oh, what's creepy that like he shows up and kisses her and they don't really. I'm like,
yeah.
agreed. But you know, in the original fairy tale, he doesn't show up until she's already dead. That's the first time he meets her in the fairy tale. He's
Oh.
like walking by and he goes, "Who's that random pretty girl in a glass coffin? I'll bring her with me."
Hmm.
And that they don't even kiss in the original fairy tale. Like that's like literally that's not what wakes her up.
The original Disney movie.
Yeah, and so when Walt Disney, when he saw Snow White, he said, "We got to fix that." And this was back in the 30s, and even Walt Disney, who grew up in the Midwest, white dude, was like, "Hey, this is a little icky for like them to randomly show up at the end. Let's introduce them in the beginning of the movie and show that they very clearly like each other, so that way, when he shows up later, he's not a random dude."
Mm-hmm.
And Walt Disney saw that, and unfortunately, while they didn't have the budget and time to do it, he was going to have his own subplot in that movie. He was going to get imprisoned by the evil queen and then escape, and that's how he eventually finds Snow White to
Oh.
kind of further this
Mm-hmm.
plot. And instead of Disney live action taking that and going, oh, we're going to have this princess and romance story, they said, no, she's going to be a single independent woman. We're removing the prince from the story. And I'm like,
It doesn't have to be one or
it's
the
not,
other. So
yeah, you can do she like that's what bothers me too about Disney movies. I'm like, do you guys watch these movies? Because at no point does being a damsel in distress mean that you're not powerful.
that you're not.
At no point, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and at no point does being in love with someone make you weak. And
Exactly.
like that's what really bothers me about Disney right now. They're like, oh, love stories. They're like so old fashioned. Love is old fashioned. You
That doesn't.
having two people love each other. True love is like that's not old fashioned. That's we still do that nowadays. And I'm like, that's like we didn't need to remove that plot from Snow White.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to make her strong, then just do the movie. No, you can't argue that Snow White's not a powerful woman.
Yeah.
She is a young girl who lost her father, then gets tried to murder. The dude was trying to cut out her heart. And she ran into the forest at like 14, 15 years old by herself, goes into this building she's never been to before. And what's her first idea? To clean it. She says, hey, I'm going to try to live here. And if I'm going to live here, I'll do this. And maybe they'll be nice to me and let me stay. You know?
Yeah.
That's power. That's just because she's not fighting or creating like that's power and humility and love, you know, and trust. And that's her big thing is trusting strangers. It
Mm-hmm.
blows up in her face. Don't trust
Yeah.
every stranger because that's how she ends up.
Careful who you trust for sure.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a movie about trust, about being young and being in these woods, and you know, and like learning that there are good people out there. There are good strangers and there are bad strangers, and you have to learn the difference between the two.
You have to.
And to me,
That's
I'm like,
very.
that's what I would love to see. And instead, we're gonna get they're introducing a new not love interest, but he's there with the seven dwarves. And then there was a whole thing where they're not using dwarves anymore. They're going to use dwarf actors.
It's seven or so just different people, but it's not considered little people. So.
They were going to do that, and
Mm.
now they're using CGI. They're all CGI
Oh,
creatures. So they're like now they're fairy tale creatures. Now they're fairy tale dwarves.
right.
So they're going to have a bunch of like. So they took the dwarf actors,
Mhm.
and we're like, hey, we're going to have some of them are going to be women, some of them are going to be this, and we're going to have a whole diversity. And everyone's like, what? Just
Yeah.
make them the dwarves. And they're like, oh no, we're not going to call them dwarves either. And then so everyone's like, hey,
Yeah.
just follow the movie. Just if you're going to remake, just remake the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know. And so now they're like, hey, we're gonna do this, and that's the whole thing with the dwarf community.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Dinklage was like, hey, I don't want like dwarf actors should not be playing dwarf characters. It's offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And then Disney was like, okay, if that's how you feel. And then all the rest of the dwarf community, the dwarf actor community, was like, hey, don't speak for us. This is our bread. This is how we make money. Like you're big and famous, Mr. Game of Thrones,
Exactly.
not the rest of us.
Yeah.
Don't speak for us because you're costing us jobs.
Right.
And so yeah, it's a whole mess and everything. And I'm like, there was a middle ground there. There was a middle ground there of like maybe make them fairy tales, the big beards and the over exaggerated features, and then just hire dwarf actors to voice them. and portray them in mocap. Like you could have done that, and I think everyone would have been happy with it.
I'm sure.
So we'll see. We'll see what they
We'll
do.
see, but I know it's coming out next year, so I guess we'll see if it flops or not. I'll still be watching it. I
I'm
really hope it.
I'm hopeful that they figured it out because Greta Gerwig is attached to it, and I hope that she figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but a part of me is like, because I always said they're like, oh, well, Richard Ziegler said this and Richard Ziegler said that, and blah blah blah. Okay, to address a few things.
Mm-hmm.
Snow White was named after her looks. You can't argue that. She was literally named Snow White because her skin was as white as snow, her hair is as black as ash, her lips are as red as blood.
Right.
So that is her character. So she has to have fair skin. The actress is half white, German specifically, and half Mexican.
Mm-hmm.
Ziegler. You can't tell me that she's Latina with a last name like Ziegler. Her father's white. So she's half. She's biracial. And more importantly than that, does she look the part? Right?
Yeah.
Black hair,
Yeah.
fair skin. Enough. It's enough.
Yeah.
Because I look at that and I'm like, she looks more like Snow White than Kristen Stewart did. You know?
Exactly.
And they're like, well, it's in Germany. First off, Snow White, nobody knows where it's from. The Grimm's brothers did not write Snow White. They heard it from someone who heard it from someone who heard it from someone, which is to say that someone told them and they lied because they didn't want that person to get credit, which is what the Grimm's brothers did all the time. They never wrote an original story. All they did was they spoke multiple languages and they would talk to people from different languages and cultures and they go, oh, that's so interesting. And they read it in German and then translate it to English. And that's why they're popular.
I came to.
So this idea of like, yeah, they're like, oh, well, like Snow White's German. No, the writers of her were German. At least the guys who wrote the story we know were German. Doesn't mean the story is German, So to me, it's like she doesn't need to be some German princess, whatever. And also, you're likely not to find a German with blue eyes and fair skin and black hair. Realistically, it's
No.
yeah, it's not gonna happen,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, it's is that as far as her looks and everything, I think it's fine.
Yep.
I think she definitely needs to be talking to Disney's marketing team, and they'd be like, hey, shut up. Just shut your mouth. Just shut up, please.
No, yeah.
It's like every time you open your mouth, people get mad, And I'm like, and it reminds me of like, I don't know if you were keeping up with Beauty and the Beast came out, where
Fortunately,
the live action.
I do not know.
Okay, so it was a lot of people. So Emma Watson is a very, very, very feminist. Like feminist movement is her big, big thing. And so when Beauty and the Beast live action was coming out,
Mm-hmm.
she was like, Belle isn't going to be a damsel in distress. She's not going to wear heels. She is a proud, independent woman who don't need no man, and all these things. And she was like running up and down like, this is a feminist movement. She's a feminist woman. She is an educated woman. And everyone's like, oh, what do you? This doesn't really sound like Belle anymore. This.
Yeah, it's like a different character.
Yeah. And then the movie came out, and no, it's Belle. They wrote Belle exactly as she's written in the animated movie. So everyone's like, so what the hell is Emma Watson talking about? Like, she's like,
who knows?
Yeah. And so I'm like, I think this is one of those cases where Rachel Zegler's like, look, this is how I see the character. And the writers and directors are probably like, well, you can see the character that way, but we're going to show the audience this. Yeah. And it's going to get to a point where Disney's going to start learning from the facts, right? If this movie does bad, they're going to be like, hey, maybe let's get an actress who's not so loudmouth, and maybe let's get a team who wants to stick more to the to the style. If that's the problem. Yeah. If it does good, then these people complaining can just shut up. Like clearly, if Rachel Zegler doesn't matter to the thing, because we do see like with the Flash movie that came out, people did not like Ezra Miller, and they're like, hey, I'm not going to watch a movie with Ezra Miller, and that's their opinion too. If they're like, hey, whatever, this, and this, I don't like Ezra Miller, and they voted with their wallets, and they said, I don't care about Michael Keaton as Batman, I don't care about how good this movie is, I will not support Ezra Miller.
Right.
So guess what? Ezra Miller's gone. He's not in the DC anymore. And they announced before that, they were like, hey, if this movie does good, we're keeping Ezra. He's the only actor we're going to keep as the Flash because we love Ezra Miller. Movie did bad. They found it was because Ezra Miller. He's gone. I'm like, so people can vote with your wallet. The loud rhetoric and stuff, studios are now realizing that they don't really care about that stuff. But like, because loud rhetoric, people shouting, doesn't equal something doing bad. You could have a bunch of viral videos going, this is the worst movie, and it could get 10 million views.
Yeah.
Movie makes $1 billion.
It could.
Yeah. Nobody cares. It's like Inside Out 2. They were very clear about how they wanted to show diversity. They're like, hey, we're going to have people with, there's the one woman, and I think she's in the hijab.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you have her, you have other characters, you have a predominantly female cast. There's no, because it's a girls' hockey camp,
Yeah.
There's no and in fact, there's no guys in the movie outside of the emotions.
Like
You know,
the
and so you could look at exactly you could look at that and go, well, that's woke. It's an all female cast, and they've got brown women and black women and Asian and all this stuff.
mm-hmm.
But no one did that, or if they did, they weren't loud enough because I think people were like, whatever. And the movie just made $1 billion.
I'm sure like the movie is such a success. Like
Yeah,
Inside Out 2, people are loving it.
yeah,
It's doing box office
yeah.
for sure.
As I'm saying, it just passed $1 billion, and yet they were able to include diversity because
Yeah.
they found this line where
Mhm.
they're like, okay, so we're not going to show like too much LGBT stuff. Like
Mhm.
we're gonna keep that. If we're gonna do it, it's gonna be more balanced. We're gonna tell this diverse story and have diversity, but we're not gonna cross the threshold because there are people with different opinions, and regardless of what side you stand on,
Mhm.
people want their opinions respected. So like, hey, I think we found this niche market where we're showing diversity, but
Mhm.
we're not shoving it down your throats to the point that people are gonna get mad about it. You know, because like you look at Onward, that one character's like, "Oh my wife," that's all she said. "Oh my wife,"
People were having
China Bandit, Russia
everybody.
Bandit, yeah. Yeah. And
Mhm.
so, and it affected the movie. So I think
Mhm.
studios are going to go forward going, hey, like, we're going to have some diversity. We're not going to
Mhm.
push it too far for now. We're going to have some diversity. And at the same time, like, really it'll be there. And I think that's the way to go. I think we need to baby step everything. You can't just go like, hey, we're going to have all the characters be this and no more white guys. And it's like,
Like
well, I
a lot of
understand that. I understand it.
mhm.
Yeah. But you have to baby step this stuff,
Yeah.
and the thing is still like I see a Star Wars people go, oh well, there's no white guys in the Acolyte. Well, there wasn't any Latinos in episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Mhm.
So, and all the Clone Wars stuff, so we weren't there. How do you think that made us feel?
Right.
You don't like not being included. Neither do anyone else. There's
Yeah,
Mace
all wanted
Windu.
included.
Yeah,
That's
Lando Calrissian, Mace Windu, only black dudes in all of Star Wars up until episode 7, 8, 9.
mm,
How do you think black people felt about that? And there still hasn't been any black women. So it's like,
mm,
except for episode 9.
mhm.
So I'm like, how do you? So like people being like, well, I don't like that it's excluding me. Yeah, we don't either. So now you understand. So can we get all on the same page as both fans and the studio and go, hey,
For to have that sort of inclusivity, right?
exactly. Let's all feel inclusive. Let's all have parts to play in this role, and then will you be happy? And sometimes people will still be like, no, still
Yeah.
not happy.
Yeah.
But you try your best. You do what you can. And like I said, like as a writer, as a filmmaker, as everything, I'm like, you try your best to
Mhm.
understand. And I've been talked to by a lot of
Mhm.
producers about Latino stuff. I've been talked to by a head of a studio a few times
Oh,
about like, hey,
yeah.
what is this? How do you feel about Latino representation in this movie? And I'm like, I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm gonna say as nicely as I can because you could give me and ruin my life, but I don't think it was very good for XYZ. And they go, okay,
Did you
like
the new Blue Beetle film? What did you think of that?
the Warner Brothers actually invited me to their studio for that one.
Wow.
Uh, and it was funny because hilariously, so I was at Warner Brothers Studio. We got to see the trailer 2 weeks early before anyone else, and it
Yeah.
wasn't a content creator thing. It was for media people. I was one of like 5 content creators there out of like 30 people,
Mhm.
and they're like, "Hey, who has questions?" So I raised my hand, and they didn't pick me, and then they keep picking people, and there were 6 of us that raised our hand, and then I'm the last person, and they're like, "Well, sorry, there's no more questions. We're out of time."
Oh, I see.
And then, so I was like, okay. And the director, Angel Manuel Soto, who I'm mutuals with on Instagram, and I talk to him fairly often.
That's mhm.
Um, he's like, no, no, no. He has a question. We've got time for it.
You gotta
And so I got to ask my question. And I was the only Latino that got to ask the question.
mm.
Everyone else asked question wasn't Latino.
Oh,
And so it was one of those things of even at a Blue Beetle event where I'm Latino, the director's Latino, Sholo was there. Sholo and Angel, the director and actor, were there.
wait, did you meet
Yeah,
him?
I've had a private dinner with Sholo actually, where I got to meet his family and everything.
Oh my God.
So yeah, it was for the Blue Beetle movie because I wasn't going to the red carpet and neither
Oh,
was he. He's like, hey, the night before, you want to go have like private dinner, pizza, and we'll just hang out and eat. And I'm like, absolutely. So I got to meet his family in Sholo,
yeah.
and he showed me all the behind the scenes of Blue Beetle stuff that he filmed on his phone and stuff.
Oh my.
Um, yeah. So
So,
like it's moments like that that I like. I know these actors care. I know these studios care sometimes. But he like I said, even at a Blue Beetle event
mhm.
where there's like Latino, even the one Latino guy wanting to answer the question, they're like, no, sorry, we don't have time for you.
That's unfortunate.
And it took the director to step in.
Then you got to ask your question.
Yeah. And so it's times like that. Like I've been mistaken for help before, a few times, in fact. We were pulling up to, I won't say which event, but we were pulling up to an event and they're like, oh, the waiters park over here. Then this is for the
Oh, they just
guests.
assume that.
Yeah, she just right up. Just I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh no, I'm here. And in fact, I was in the wrong place. That was for media. I was supposed to walk the red carpet that event,
Mm-hmm.
but I assumed I was like, oh, maybe I get there from here. And they're like, oh, yeah, you were supposed to go to the red carpet. That person should have told you red carpet for you, and she
Wow.
didn't. And I've been times where like I've been at events and like I see people who don't look like me are taking pictures and selfies. So then I try to take a selfie, and security go, oh, you can't stand here. And I look and I see people that don't look like me still taking selfies while the security guard's talking to me, and I'm like,
It's
okay.
yeah. That
it's
means
it happens a lot, and and it's not just one studio. A lot of studios this happens
hmm
with, where you kind of just feel like, oh, I don't, it's that imposter syndrome starts sneaking up on you because like
right.
I've had events where like the Invitation, the movie The Invitation, which is about the black girl and
Yeah.
Dracula.
Right.
So
I know
and
that one.
I liked it. I liked the movie a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I got invited to a private event for that, and the producer came up to me unwarranted and was like, "Hey, so what'd you think of the Curse of La Llorona movie?" He's like, "That was my previous
Okay.
movie." He's like, "What'd you
Okay.
think of that?" And I was like, and me and my wife kind of looked at each other, like as a Latino, and he's like, "As a Latino, like, what do you?"
Like, hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I was
Right.
like, and we're like, we didn't really like it, and he's like, could you explain why? He's like, because we got the like we know Latinos didn't watch it. He's like, we're just not sure why, and I was like, well, like I'll break it down for you, you know. And I explained everything, and he's like, cool, like I want to. I think this is on Google. I think I double checked to make sure this is on Google. But he told me they're making a second one. They're making a second Curse La Llorona
Okay.
movie with an all Latino cast and crew.
Mm.
He said we learned our lesson from the first time. I'm looking for a Latino writer and director, and I'm looking for a Latino cast. We're not making the same mistakes. We're making a La Llorona movie with a white woman as the main character and a white
Mm.
director. You know,
Right.
and he was like, because he's like, I learned a lesson. He's like, I think he's like, would you guys watch a second one? I was like, absolutely, we'd watch a second Curse La Llorona
Mm-hmm.
if it was like, because Latinos, we have this weird thing with race and how we view it and everything. But I'm
Mm.
like, but if we can immediately surface level look and then go La Llorona, scary Latinos, we're in.
Okay. Right.
So I told him I was like, like Latinos are very stubborn,
Mm.
but at the same time, if you do the right thing at the right time, super forgiving. Like we're irrationally forgiving to certain things. All you got to do is say sorry. So if they come out,
That,
and I was telling them, I was like, you come out and say, look, we messed up the first time, our bad.
hmm
Here's it for you. I was like, you'll make money. And I've been a pro. I've been asked those kind of questions by producers, everything going like, hey, I made this Latino thing, or how was the representation of Latinos? Was it good? Was it bad? And it's not just white people; it's black people have done this too, where they make a movie like, hey, I'm a black guy. I want the character to speak Spanglish, but I'm not sure if it was offensive. And
yeah.
I'm like, no, you got it good, you know? And so I'm looking up that in my position and with everything that I like, people go up to me and go, hey, like, is it good? you
Yeah.
know?
And you can.
And I can only speak to myself. Exactly. I can only speak to myself and everything, but I try my best to do this kind of
hmm
stuff. And I can just say that it hasn't happened yet, but I've only been doing this for 3 years.
hmm
So I think as time goes on, we will see more Latino representation, more black representation, it's more authentic. We'll stop having a bunch of white dudes sitting in a room going, "What do black people
Yeah.
want? What do Mexicans
Them
want?"
in the room,
Yeah,
having
exactly,
black actors in the room, black directors, Latin
exactly.
directors. So
Yes,
that's important.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it'll happen. It will happen. I have no doubt. It's going to take a while, but I think it will eventually happen.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Matthew, for joining this first podcast episode and for really sharing about animation, Latin representation, folklore. It was really interesting just to dive into that. All of your Disney knowledge is just amazing. I'm just so a fan. Like, thank you so much.
Of course, of course. If you ever want to do this again, this was a great time. You are the sweetest person. So thank you. I had a great time here.